No Miki Show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The No Miki Show.
Well, hello. It is Tuesday, January 4th. Happy New Year, everybody. This is TNS Live. You guys know that we do TNS Live every Tuesday, 8 p.m., where we talk to our favorite guests about the most important issues. We start over on YouTube, and then we move over to rockfin.com/nomiki, where you get the extended interview where we talk about all the important stuff, of course. But yeah, I mean, this is an important time because everyone's got New Year's resolutions. I was asked today, what's your New Year's resolution? I mean, I have some personal things, but all of my personal things they're all resolutions to help sort of get us to a stronger place, or get myself to a stronger place for the real fights that are happening in 2022. I think all of us understand that this country and this world is at risk of survival for those of us who will be, who are under 40, as many publications have stated. Climate change will be our biggest fight. But simultaneously, there are other elements that we're fighting: fascism, pseudo-fascism, fascist populism, right-wing populism, the Democratic Party that is neoliberal and unwilling to change its patterns, and of course, just fighting for our everyday needs, our material interests, our the economy that we're living in, trying to scrape by, trying to get just a little bit of support to unionize, to organize. We're fighting at the local level. We're fighting at the national level. We're fighting at the party level, and even international level. It's a lot, right? A lot. Oh, and by the way, we're also all fighting each other. Let's be real. Everybody's just fighting each other. But it's important because I've had a lot of sobering moments in the last few months that make me seriously worried about our chances of gaining power in ways that can compete with the right, which have been experimenting with 40 years of corporate takeover, and they've been 40 plus years, very successful at it. And now they're running, I'm going to repeat it ad nauseum, the Proud Boys are running at the city council and the school board level. School boards are, of course, where the Koch brothers love to experiment. They were doing that 25, 30 years ago, and they were able to spread their fight. School board, the teachers' unions are the largest union, strongest union, I'd say, in terms of membership and ability to donate. I mean, there's a lot of I'm sure there are other unions that have membership, but they're the largest donors to the Democratic Party in terms of union support. That's important. So of course they want to go for school boards. It's also a predominantly female-led field in terms of membership. And it's not service worker, which is also a majority female field. So what does that mean? It means we have to be more sophisticated and strategic about how we fight in 2022, because 2022 is projected, fascism or not, weak party or not, to be a horrible loss for Democrats. The Senate, the Congress by maybe a few, and likely 2024, it's not looking great for Democrats. So I like to go back into history, to my roots, and think, well, have we been here before? Has it been this bad before? Can we get over this? Are we missing some things? And I think we are. I think that we have, as a movement, because we do not have unions as strong as they used to be 40, 50, 60 years ago, even, as a result, we don't have the skills to really practice solidarity because we haven't practiced it. We don't have the skills to expand our outreach and our organizing because we don't have as many unions. There are a lot of groups out there that are organizing and building unions, whether it's in media or at Amazon or Uber, wherever you are as a gig worker or not, folks are organizing. But it's the practice of solidarity that gets us to understand solidarity in these critical moments. So I wanted to go back to basics, and I can't help but feel like maybe 1938 is where we are. Do we really get it in our bones how bad it is? Is it that bad? Are we really are we in the brink of something much worse? And so, of course, I go to the smartest people I know, and Harvey Kaye is one of the smartest I know. Professor Harvey Kaye, Professor Emeritus at University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, expert in democracy, FDR, Thomas Paine, Latin America, British Marxism. Am I missing anything? Oh, you are really into Mastika now, which is
I am. I've got one serving worth, but I just ordered from another company online. I'm hoping it gets here sooner rather than later.
I'm going to send you some.
Have you ever heard of Axia?
Have I heard of what?
Axia. It's another, I told you I had bought a bottle of Skinos. Can't get that anywhere out here, but I noticed online there's a company called Axia, which is
Axia. I'll look it up. I have to see because X in Greek,
smart,
Greek letters is he.
Is not one of my things. It's AXIAS. There you go.
AXIAS. I have to see if it's Achias or
no S on the end. It says AXIA. Sorry. No.
All right, we'll look it up. It's all good. All right. So you're also a Japanese whiskey fan too. Let's you diversify. You're a great wine drinker. All right. So Harvey, let's start off with our greater audience to talk just briefly. We can go into more depth because we want everybody to stick around for the next part. But I keep going to 1938. I felt that way in 2015, 16, but now I feel it like in my bones. And I don't know if everybody feels it in their bones, which makes me think, did people in 1938 feel it in their bones that something bad was coming? I just want to reference one part of this. I read a biography about a year ago of Rosa Luxemburg, who, of course, tragically was murdered on the banks of the river. And in the description, the day that she was pulled into questioning or interrogation and then murdered on the riverbed with her comrades, it just seemed like another day. Like she was actually, we might get out of this, even though she was warning personally. She was warning of what was happening in red-brown alliances. I mean, you know more than anybody. But is that what's happening? Like, I don't mean to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think history tells us that we have good reason to believe in possibilities, both progressive and, for lack of a better way of putting it, horrific, quasi-fascist. And I think that, a lot of people on the left are saying that we exaggerate January 6th events of last year, so on. But I don't think people quite realize that they stormed the Capitol. People ended up being killed. Okay. They carried nooses with them. They were out to get people, period. And of course, you could say, well, that's one event. But the fact is that the big lie has sustained a really dark vision of America. Mm-hmm. And added to that is keep in mind, January 6th was the day to validate the election results in Congress.
Right.
And what we've seen since the inauguration later that month on January 20th are a series. We saw the American Rescue Plan, 3 cheers for the American Rescue Plan. It was the counterpart would be FDR's early efforts at relief back in the early 30s. But it's also the case that vast numbers of people and particular groups of Americans know that they were lied to,
right,
in the promises made. I mean, by the way, to win in 2022, the Democrats are going to have to make sure that young people turn out in a way that they normally only turn out for in a presidential election year. And when I talk to former students of mine, one of the things they say, although they're not necessarily they wouldn't even consider voting for Trump, most of the students who came through our program, but what they do say is that they were lied to. Now, what that tells us is that it isn't that people are going to rapidly move from one camp of, the Democrats to the Republicans. What it means is people just may not feel committed to the Democrats, determined to turn out to vote. Mm-hmm. And I want to remind everyone, let's go back to 1980, say. The fact is that, and I did not vote for Jimmy Carter, and I think he was one of the worst presidents, and he literally kicked off the neoliberal, decades. But but it is
Let's
the
go
case
back to that to remind people how that happened. Let's go back to that.
Carter lost because millions of Democrats, working people, just didn't vote, which basically enabled Reagan to rally those who were inclined possibly to vote for Republicans to turn out and vote for him. And seriously speaking, the worry I have is that in 2022, we will see right-wing Republican victories because many people will have been so disappointed by the Biden 18 months, 2 years of his presidency.
Because let's remind people in 1980 when Reagan lost his reelection, and also when he won.
Carter.
I'm sorry, excuse me, Carter. Excuse me. When Reagan won and Carter lost his reelection, the economy was spiraling out of control. I mean, whether it was Carter's fault, obviously the recession was happening.
It was called stagflation.
Exactly.
A stagnant
Ford
economy with
dropped dead
inflation.
in New York City. Like, you know, this
It was
was
a tough decade, really abysmal decade.
bad decade.
Unless you had a lot of money and certain kinds of certificates, in which case you were doing great. The rich always do great.
And this is and I think sometimes the neoliberal establishment will blame the 60s and the progress of the 60s and the uprisings of the 60s and Vietnam and civil rights movement and leftists, you know, even into 1972, they'll blame sort of the left in different flavors and forms when they want to, depending on who it is, for kind of how we got there, right? Like I heard it when I was in the Union Reform Commission, and I was just like, what logic are you working from? Some of these people are actual historians. Conveniently put on the Union Reform Commission to you know, halt any progress. But that was kind of like the origins, right?
Yeah.
But
the shorthand was people jumped to the conclusion that the progressive agenda that the left was advancing in the 60s alienated
union agenda,
decidedly a union agenda, as well as a feminist agenda, civil rights agenda, anti-corporate agenda, that was alienating people. But in fact, polling in the 70s and even into the 80s showed that most Americans were as liberal-minded. I'm using the language of the time. Were as liberal-minded and as liberal in their aspirations as they had been in the 60s. The problem was the Democrats, especially under Carter, had literally retreated. He turned his back on labor, turned his back on the environmentalists, he turned his back on consumer movement. And what happened? He literally opened the door to he was the first neoliberal president.
Well, we talked about maybe even Kennedy was, but officially neoliberal in that.
Yeah, well, Kennedy was this
just sparked it. Yeah. But it with Carter, just want to remind folks, this is when the Democrats kicked out labor from the party and brought in lobbyists because they wanted to keep up. They used the excuse of, well, now it's about media. Now it's about, we have to keep up with the ads of the Republicans, just as, you know, in 2006, folks said we have to lean hard on the military industrial complex and not being swift boated again because we were done that, you know, they did that test in 2004. And so you saw to this day, I mean, people who just as an example, you see a lot of veteran Democrats running because they want to be strong on military. So there's all these like pivots. So in 1976, when Carter was elected, and into 80, there were a lot of adjustments, hard adjustments to rid labor from the Democratic Party, and simultaneously, you know, this neoliberal class. I was watching a documentary. I'm so happy you have Reagan up on screen right now because I watched this documentary on Showtime. I don't know if you saw it, on Reagan. And it is, I mean, people that you and I would not necessarily go to assess neoliberalism were partly because I think it was filmed recently and it's hard to kind of escape it, but they were aggressive on Reagan and aggressive on Carter. Jonathan Alter saying, you know, Reagan was playing pseudo-populist and Carter was not delivering the way progressives needed and abandoned labor. I mean, he was saying stuff that you and I are talking about right now, because I think they're starting to catch up with, okay, this strategy didn't work. The DLC strategy, the blue dogs, you figure out the iteration of it because you're all kind of the same people more or less. But Grover Norquist jumped in, who you know from Wisconsin very well. Grover Norquist is out there openly with the strategy of conservatives to tap into, number one, working class people, a little flavor of dog whistle racism, because they can't say it out loud anymore. It's not classy. And then simultaneously tap into some labor folks that are not being brought in by the Democrats anymore. Flash forward, a lot of the same people were the ones who decided, okay, first was we kick out labor. Second, we kick out just the actual local parties. So move forward to today, and why I worry it's 1938, but in a very different way, is the Democrats. Can you imagine, like, we're at war? This country, I mean, those two parties are at war. You have labor that has barely what it had 40 years ago, 50, 60, 70, keep going. So they don't have the ground support, and they're definitely not training people to organize. We're starting to catch up. And then simultaneously, we do not have actual Democratic parties recruiting and building a pipeline in these states. You're in Wisconsin. You know this more than labor and the party was attacked.
Yeah.
So it's open. It's just like, if you're in actual physical war, world war, if you're a different country, they would be like, oh yeah, of course we're going to invade. There's no one there. There are no troops there. Like,
yeah, look, they declared war. Capital declared war on labor in the 70s. And the Democrats by that time had turned their backs on the very movements that had enabled the Democrats to take power for so many years. And Jimmy Carter himself was anti-Rosa. His family was known as antagonistic, from Georgia, antagonistic to FDR. It was a known fact. Okay. So Reagan is elected. Reagan knew more. Reagan in public seemed more affectionate to about FDR and his memory than Carter ever did. The difference was that Reagan hijacked lines of FDR to use in his speeches, as he did with both Thomas Paine and Abraham Lincoln. And he portrayed himself in some ways as a new rendition of FDR. He was going to, remake America. The difference is that he was literally going to turn literally the FDR agenda, which Carter had already abandoned, but Reagan was going to try do his best to bury the FDR agenda. And that's what we've seen now for 45 years. We've seen, which unfortunately the Republicans only had one of the shovels to bury the legacy. And the neoliberal Democrats, Carter, Clinton, yes, Obama in his own fashion. Oh, by the way, and you mentioned Jonathan Alter. Well, Jonathan Alter is a puppy dog to the neoliberals. Let's make that clear, okay? I mean, his biography of Carter, his work on Obama is all an apology for those folks, not in any way a critical biography. But he's the kind of guy who shows up on CNN and maybe MSNBC. So let's remember that the history that we're presented with by the likes of, the mainstream corporate Dems and their puppy dogs is not the history we should ever swallow. Okay?
That's what I thought was so crazy about this. I looked at the people and I'm like, this is revisionist history. I mean, but to be clear, they were kind of saying what we say, just they haven't in their writing, before basically last year. I think the pandemic sort of forced them into pivoting a little bit. We're going to move over right now to Rockfin. But on that note, in this Reagan documentary, they pulled up some footage from 1980 saying, who's the future of the Democratic Party? And then somebody, I can't remember who it was, some reporter on obviously one of the three channels, because it was 1980, said, well, there's this all-star coming out of Delaware, this guy named Joe Biden. And I thought, I don't know if you watched Succession, but I was just sitting there going, they've all had it figured. I mean, that was early days. That's like DLC. That's very early on. All right, the new Dems, they basically owned our party for this long. So we're gonna shift over to Rockfin. We're gonna talk a little bit more about how do we fight the new Dems? Because I'm of the belief that they're weaker than we think, but it's like we're conditioned into thinking that we can't take on these powers with some sort of bigger power. I want to pitch your brain on this and think about it from the terms of 1938 and some of the biggest stars of that era. progressive stars of that era who were thinking this way. But first off, I also want to just announce to everybody, we're really excited because in this new year, our dear friend Ben Dixon, we are partnering up on a awesome project where we're going to do regular on his show and my show. So he has his morning show at 8 a.m. Eastern and our show 8 p.m. Eastern, because we never stop working, clearly. Real solidarity. But we're doing Solidarity Wednesdays, and Ben and I are going to be talking about issues of allyship. We're going to bring on guests to discuss what it means to be a good ally with this community. Ben and I have had a lot of conversations over the years about what does it mean to be a good ally to each other. And this is the moment where it's like, if you don't have trainings out there showing people what solidarity looks like, because we're seeing a lot of infighting, we have to remind folks, this is what solidarity looks like. This is how we build consensus. This is how we build allyship, because that is what they don't want us to split up. They don't want us to divide. They want us all to fight. And Ben and I, he's been incredible with his work, and I'm just excited that we're launching this. So it's going to be on our regular shows, and then tomorrow, thank you. Look at David; he's on top of it. Steven Donziger is out of prison, but he is now in jail at his house. What does that look like? How long is this going on? What's happening with the fight against Chevron? He is, of course, the first and only attorney to ever be able to prosecute an oil company with a record dollar amount. And of course, they went after him in every way possible. The UN's called Desmond Tutu before he passed away, may he rest in peace, called out this process, and he is under, it's not house arrest, he's actually in prison in his home, who was released before the holidays from the prison in Danbury, Connecticut, and he has a sentence that he has to continue to serve out. So we're going to talk with him, and then Ron Chowdhury is going to join us from Germany to talk about what's going on overseas, and many, many more. But we're going to have a little bit more tomorrow, I think, too. So check us out. All right, we're moving over to rockfin.com/Nomiki. We will be right back after this little break with Harvey Kaye.